Hello, in this video we are going to look at word classes. Last time we looked at sentence constituents, and there is an important difference between sentence constituents and word classes, and unfortunately they often get mixed up, so it's important to remember this difference between these two categories. Sentence constituents can only be discussed if we have a clause or sentence, so that the words occur in a context. So it's only in a clause that we can tell that a specific word functions as some sentence constituent. Word classes, on the other hand, are categories where we try to gather words that belong to a group of words that have things in common. So this is just a classification or categorization of words where we put all the words in a language into different buckets or into different containers because these words have certain things in common. And here, when we talk about word classes, we don't really need a context. We can discuss which word class a word belongs to, even if we just have an individual word. And another thing that is important to remember is that when we discuss word classes, we only look at one word at a time. So we need really to, so we can only talk about one word. And say that this word belongs to this word class. Whereas when it comes to sentence constituents, it is very often the case that several words together function as a sentence constituent. So several words together function as the subject or the predicate of a clause, for example. And what things can words have in common? Well, the two very important things that they can have in common is the ways that we use them. So how we use words is very important for deciding to which word class the word belongs. But also, and maybe an even better or simpler way of telling the word class of a word is what kind of endings does this word take? So what kind of endings can we add to this specific word that we are investigating? Let's start with the maybe the biggest word class in Somali and in many other languages, nouns. So a noun, maga, and plural nouns, maga yo, maga yada. We have two important subtypes of nouns. We have names that are called magagar, magagara, proper nouns in English, but in everyday communication we usually talk about these nouns as names of persons and places, etc. And names are nouns, even though they do not usually take any endings. It is absolutely possible to add endings to names, but it's not very common. For example, jubba. There it's rather common to say things like jubbada hose, for example. So there we have the ending, the definite article that is added to the noun, to the name. But for all ordinary nouns, common nouns, maragud, it's very common to add endings to those nouns. And one of the most important endings that we can add to a noun is the definite article. If we just take the simple noun cup, shoe, then we add the definite article ta, and we get kapta. So that is a very good way of showing or proving that cup is indeed a noun, that we can add the definite article. But there are also many other endings that can be added to nouns. So it's not just the definite article. And in Somali there are really many endings that correspond to small words in English that occur as independent words before the noun. In Somali we have an ending e, hage, and in English that would be something like which way, which direction, where. Where is not a very suitable translation to show that we have this additional word in English. So which direction, which way, something like that. Which place. There are also lots of endings in Somali that express owner or position. So we can take dukan, keda, her shop, etc. and add these endings. But it's still just one word, and the word is still a noun without regard to these endings that are added. So, as I said, there are really many endings that can be added to nouns, and we'll get back to that in week 7, I think, in unit 7. Then we have adjectives. An adjective, sifo. Adjective, sifoyinka. It's very common also in Somali to see that the term tilmame is used for adjectives. But tilmame has been used in different books and by different authors for many other things in Somali grammar. So it can be slightly confusing to use tilmame if you have read some other works where it's used in a different way. So sifo is a very good term because it's never been used for anything else than adjectives. Somali adjectives are used after nouns, so they're used as an addition to a noun. They don't have any definite article. They don't change when we put the noun in the definite form. So we add the definite article to the noun, but nothing happens to an adjective. So magalo Wayne, magalada Wayne. And this is a rather good test for adjectives to see if it fits, if it works, to put it after a noun and then change the form of the noun to the definite, add the definite article, and then nothing should happen to the adjective. We can also try and use adjectives with the verb yahai and say things like wa, u, wain yahai. So if we can connect it with the verb yahai in that way, pronounce it together as one unit, wainjai, wainjai, then that's also a proof that this word is an adjective. But not all adjectives can be connected with the verb jai. So an adjective like hose cannot be used in that way. It's only used after a noun. The next word class, the next very big word class, maybe almost as big as nouns, is verbs. Fall, falal, falalka. And verbs can be recognized through the different tenses that the verb can be used in. So there are endings that we add to verbs to show time, and these different time endings are referred to in grammar as tenses, tense forms. We have in Somali we have 3 different tenses or time forms. We have the present, what is happening now. In Somali jogto, as a term, grammatical term. We have past tense, takto, and future tense, timado. And the endings in these different forms are contain a for the present tense. It contains a or e for the past tense, and it contains a whole verb form, an auxiliary verb in the future tense. So the verb dona is added to the main verb here, arki dona. So we have 2 words, we have 2 different verbs, a main verb and an auxiliary verb in the future tense. So if you can do this with a word, you have proof that it is a verb, indeed. Then we have pronouns, and there are not very many pronouns in a language, and actually the number of pronouns in Somali is slightly lower than in English, because in many functions you actually use a noun in Somali. So in English as well, basically something, it contains thing in English, and that's exactly how it is expressed in Somali, just wah for something. In Swedish we have a small pronoun, not or något, that is not, it's not possible to kind of take it apart and see that it contains other words. Well, if we think more about this, we probably arrive at the conclusion that it's a contraction of någonting. So again we have ting, thing, which then corresponds to wah. But in Somali it's just wah, and for somebody it's usually qof, and so on. So many pronouns in Swedish and English correspond to small nouns in Somali. That's why the list of typical pronouns is slightly shorter in Somali. But here are some of the pronouns in Somali. We have subject pronouns, short ones, that are more or less obligatory in Somali clauses. And we have other longer personal pronouns. We have demonstrative pronouns that are used to point or tell where somebody or something is located, if it's close or far away. We also have these possessive pronouns that tell us who is the owner of an object. and we have interrogative pronouns that we use to ask questions. So you don't see all the pronouns on the screen right now. And we'll get back to pronouns in week 8 and go through them in detail. Next important word class in Somali are prepositions. Horjale. That's a direct translation of preposition horjale. And in English there's quite a few prepositions. I don't know the exact number, but it's a couple of dozens. And in Somali there are only 4 real Somali prepositions. There is also another very important and interesting difference. In English and Swedish, the prepositions go in front of a noun, but in Somali the prepositions go in front of a verb or an adjective. And the explanation or reason that there is a difference is basically that the function that a preposition fills, why prepositions are used, that is to connect a verb and a noun. Something like I live in Gothenburg, where in connects Gothenburg to the verb live. And of course, if we connect 2 words, this little preposition can equally well, with the same amount of logic, so to say, go in front of any of the 2 words that it connects. Connecting a verb and a noun, it can equally well go in front of the verb as in front of the noun. So this is a very interesting and important difference between let's say European languages in general and Somali, and we'll get back to that several times during the course. And then finally we have particles. We have already talked about the sentence particle when we looked at sentence constituents, and now we also have a word class for particles, since they play such an important role in Somali grammar. And we in the last video we saw the 2 first particles. We saw wa, which we said puts some emphasis or focus on the predicate, the verb, and then we have waha, which puts emphasis or focus on the last constituent of the clause, the last part of the clause. So both are both work or function as sentence particles in a sentence, in a clause, but when we categorize them as a word class, we just say they are particles. So there are some other particles in Somali that are used in other ways that are not used as sentence particles. But here you have the list of sentence particles. Well, there is 1 or 2 more that are very unfrequent. So these are the 6 sentence particles that are really frequent. And finally, just a short comment on numbers. Numbers are usually considered to be a word class in Swedish, English, and many other languages. And the word class is usually called numerals. But this is not a necessary word class in Somali. It instead we can say that numbers are a group of words within the noun word class, and that goes for the basic numbers or the cardinal numbers, because we can add the definite article. So we can say affar, and with the article affarta, shan shanta, and so on. So it's evident that due to the endings, definite article and other endings, we can also add all kinds of endings. These words are nouns. We also have another type of numbers, ordinal numbers, that tell us the position in a sequence. So we can say the second lesson, asharka labat, where we add labat after a noun, and when we add the definite article to the noun, nothing happens to the labat. So this fulfills the standard criteria for an adjective. It's used after a noun, and it doesn't change in form when we add the definite article to the noun. So these ordinal numbers are typical adjectives. That's all for this video. Thanks, and see you again.